Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I'm Monica.
How you doing, Miss Monica?
I'm fine. Let's start all over. Hello, everybody. I'm Monica.
I'm Ray Rio.
And we are
Overcoming Patio. One day we'll get that in unison. We're going to try every time. We ain't going to quit.
Yeah,
we're going to
have to do better. We're going to have to do better. Okay, so I was so into the music that I forgot to tag our panelists. So when we start with our first segment, I was like, dun, 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 dun. And I was like, oh no, I need to start tagging people. So
you got a lot to do. You got a lot to do. You got a lot on your hands. So I understand. Do your thing.
I know. I'm out of control. So today we have an amazing show.
Yes, we do.
We have some wonderful panelists that are going to share their level of expertise talking about different issues that plague the Black community. And we're going to dig into the why members of the Black community do not seek professional help. What is the stigma behind mental health support in the Black community? So we have some wonderful panelists that are going to be able to discuss this stuff. And we have three big themes we're going to talk about. And then we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the why and have some candid conversations about that, because we need help like everybody else. Okay. Right?
Absolutely.
So, Ray, would you like to tell them really quickly about how they can support the movement via At War Apparel? And
Absolutely.
Then we'll start.
So you guys know this whole community outreach division is spearheaded by Miss Monica. Our first initiative is covering mental health support and just bringing, important topics to light. The way that you can help out, we have a GoFundMe account that's geared specifically towards this initiative. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give the proceeds to an individual in our local community as well as a mental health organization to help out in the cause. So every little bit helps. As far as the apparel line, if you guys need a nice hoodie, t-shirt, some camo joggers, some leggings for the ladies, please support our apparel line. As I mentioned before, it's more than a clothing line. It's a movement. We definitely want to integrate into the local communities and show some support in different areas. So you can log on to our website at www.atwarapparel.com. We have our podcast branding. So we have a lot of different venues, our platforms that you can actually listen to our podcast. So some support in that arena. Also subscribe to our YouTube page. And if you like what we're doing right now, give us a like, give us a heart. We need that. So that's how you can support the apparel line as well as the initiative. We've got some other things coming down the pipeline as well, financial literacy that we'll get into the next initiative, and then some other things down the pipeline. So keep in contact, and that's how you guys can support. So.
All righty. So we're going to go ahead and get started without further ado. And we're going to start introducing our panelists. Once everyone is introduced, they're going to give their own formal introduction of who they are, their experience, and their educational backing to give them the level of expertise for us to actually listen to and pay attention to what they're saying. Okay. So first we have Cynthia Fletcher.
Miss Cynthia.
Next we have Tamika Lavelle Reeves.
Tamika.
Tia Williams Hampton.
Tia.
Miss Ellen Jones.
It's my mama, y'all.
Mylantha Williams, and last but definitely not least, my friend LaShonda Fletcher. Everybody's here.
Hey, LaShonda.
All right. So real quick, we're going to start with Cynthia. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Oh, certainly. Well, I am in private practice. I'm also a community activist. In addition to, prior to that, I used music and theater to help people to find themselves in a different place and space than they felt like they were at that time. My private practice is so full that actually January 1, starting a second business called Embrace Counseling and Consulting Services.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes. Awesome. Good for you. All right, Miss Ellen.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, you guys. Thank you for having me. I am a mother of two, grandmother of four. I work for a facility, well-known facility in New Albany, Indiana, Rauch Industries. I worked with them for a total of maybe like 13 years. And that was working with mentally and physically disabled adults, learning them to be able to go out and live on their own and to work out in the community. I have also had and have mental illness in our family. So I'm experienced with that at a very early age, had some experience with an older sibling. So I don't have any degrees, but I have that life degree.
Absolutely. And we're excited to hear your story, because we're going to start the entire show with your story, because we want a candid view of some issues that plague our community and what that looks like in the embodiment of a person. So we appreciate you for being here. All right, Tia.
Hey, hi everybody. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm Tia Williams-Hampton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Southern Indiana. I live in Jeffersonville, practice in New Albany, Indiana. I know. And I'm excited because I'm about to branch off into my own private practice, still in New Albany, Indiana. My history is, are we still here? Okay. My history is that I've been involved in community mental health for 12 years. And then in private practice for 3 years. And I love this work. It's a privilege to do what we do every single day. So I'm just glad to be here and to share whatever expertise and knowledge I have, but also to learn, because that's what I do. My clients teach me every single day. And I'm just here to be of service, period.
Awesome. Thank you, Tia.
Thank you.
All right, Tamika.
Good evening. I am Tamika Level Reeves. I am also in private practice. I just celebrated my first year in private practice. I also am an independent contractor with an EAP agency here in the city of Louisville. And I also work with master level students as an adjunct professor with an online university outside of Boston, Massachusetts. So I am an avid learner. I started my career in Virginia once I was licensed, and I moved back to my home state to practice. So I'm really excited for this panel, and I'm grateful for the ask, and I'm excited to learn as much as it is that I'm willing to give what I do know to share with others, because I think it's important for us to lean in at every opportunity that we have to be able to learn and to grow and to teach. And I'm excited to learn and to grow and to teach this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Mylantha, we used to work together at JB Atkinson, so I could not have any of these mental health podcasts without inviting her, because she's so amazing. But Mylantha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
You're muted, Mylantha.
And that's what I do all day to the kids too. So I'm a certified social worker. I work with JCPS. I have my master's in social work and my certification in school social work. So I'm a mental health practitioner with JCPS. And this is my 5th year officially with JCPS. I had the opportunity to work with them through U of L. Through a grant for about 3 years before that. I'm just kind of trying to figure out what the schools needed and work with kids at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. So I got a taste of it before I officially got hired on. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but definitely not least, LaShonda Fletcher.
Hi, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am also the owner of Revelation Counseling Center. I also have a master's in religion, and I co-pastor New Revelation Church. I'm also an author of the book, The Black Church and Mental Health. And so I have a passion to help pastors to be able to recognize mental health issues within their congregation. And my second book is also You Can't Give Up Now.
Awesome. Thank you all for being with us this evening. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Ray is going to do our first segment.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so the person that I am announcing to go first, I mean, it's probably the strongest person that I know, most inspiring person that I know, and really just the definition of what this whole initiative and my slogan stands for, overcoming battles. Very, very interesting story. It's affected us, firsthand. So nonetheless, my mom, Cora Brown, tell your story, babe.
My story, I guess, began when I was a child. My oldest brother had mental issues. He wasn't born with a disability. I really don't know the true story of how he became mentally ill, but he was in a facility most of his life in Madison State Hospital. That's when they had those facilities like Life Springs in the hospitals and of that nature. And the rest of our siblings were taught to, that it was okay not to be ashamed of where he was at or what was going on with him. And then to kind of skip ahead, because my story, I don't think could be told, there's not enough time in the show. I am going to give the basic details and then as much as I can. But my mother in 1979, February of 79, took her life while I was at home. She shot herself in the head. I was 16 years old at that time, and I was going through a teenage pregnancy. I was pregnant with my first son. And my mother was depressed. We never knew, we didn't find these things out until later on why this took place. But it was very devastating. And 3 months later, in May, my father, I witnessed him in the middle of the night have a heart attack. And I'm still in the same pregnancy. I guess I'm in my second trimester of this pregnancy. And that August of 79, I was a mother without either parent. At that time when this happened, I was never once offered to see a therapist or to go to a psychiatrist. I was treated for my pregnancy and things like that. Well, what I was given was a low dose of Valium. That's how they treated this situation. My physician at the time, I won't mention names out of respect and privacy, but this wasn't open to me. And I didn't, I'm a child at 16. I'm still a child. I didn't know that I was supposed to go through therapy or I was supposed to go and see someone and talk to this about. So I dealt with it. Just that simple. And at that time in my life either, I didn't know really the faith of God or how to hold on or anything. I knew of God. I had been taught those things. So I can't say that, I hung on to religion. Now, years later and knowing, yes, that is what brought me through. But also years later, I'll say when I approached around the late age of 27, 28, I knew that I was carrying a whole lot. I had this load on my back. I was raising 2 children. I do have to toot my own horn to that. As a child myself, raising children, I know you can see one of the examples right there before you that I did a great job.
Oh, yes, you did. Oh, yes, you did.
Thank you. Thank you. The proof is in that pudding. It really is. He's a good kid. I've been blessed with 2 good sons. But right there at that age, it was like anxiety was at its high, at its high peak. They're getting ready to become teenagers. Can't do the math in my head right now. Maybe they were at that teenage stage, but it was like, I've carried this for all these years. And I got through it. I wrote letters there. I kind of self-help therapy just did certain things to get through. And in that time period too, I started working in the mental health industry, like I mentioned, out there at Brown facilities. And that was something that my heart was wide open to. Like I said, those positions back then, you kind of needed degrees to step into. And I didn't. I stepped into that interview ready. I mean, I just said all the right things and had all the right answers. Don't know where they came from, but I was hired on the spot. A day late, mind you, for the interview. I was a day late thinking that, hey, I was there on time. And after the interview, I'll never forget, the gentleman that interviewed me, he said, "You do know that you're a day late, don't you? But you're definitely not $1 short." And I was hired, and we kind of laughed about that. But going through that period, I think the reason a lot of Blacks is because of medical insurance. At that age, I didn't have, a job at that age to support that, to have that insurance. So I just wasn't offered it. And like I said, I was even unaware that I needed it. The struggle, like I said, it lasted a very long time until I asked, it was a female doctor that I went to. And I just broke down crying one day and told her my story. And that's when I started taking medicine for anxiety. And that definitely did help. it did help. I never did go and see a therapist. There were many people that just kind of came my way in life, and I learned things on my own and prayed my way through it.
Yeah, and to even further on my mom's story, just from my point of view, she carried that burden so well. I mean, yeah, obviously, you know, we grew up like other, you know, children in medium income households and everything. But in terms of how my mom carried herself and dealt with that, she championed it, because I never experienced any, you know, issues that came from her, and she dealt with it. I mean, not only from my grandmother, but also to my uncle, and you know, she's kind of the anchor of our family. So one thing that's interesting that you had mentioned off that, I guess I can call you mom on the show, mom, is that I actually had just watched a Netflix series that was entitled 4 Weeks in Watts, and it mentions, you know, the environmental effects and just the lack of support. One of the guys that was on there, he was stating the same thing. He was, you know, once these kids, they see that trauma and death and things like that, they don't have the support to go to. They're expected to just bounce back. So it's interesting that you said that. I do want to start with LaShonda in terms of just kind of elaborating on the story that my mom had mentioned. Suicide is really big in terms of the, you know, in the mental health arena or whatever. So after suffering depression and things of that nature, that may be the only outlet that some people have. So can you just tell us, LaShonda, what are some of the warning signs that we can look for to maybe be able to kind of bounce in and, you know, show some support before a person actually gets to that point?
Yeah. So one of the things, listening to your mom, I'm thinking how resilient she is, because one of the things that they taught us, of course, as a marriage and family therapist, is that suicide is also oftentimes generational. So usually when a client come in the door, we do genealograms, which also is kind of like a family tree. And we usually ask about suicide because suicide rarely jumps a generation, usually from one generation to the next. Suicide usually happen once it happens that first time. And so I will say to anyone who's watching or that's viewing, that if you do have a history of suicide in your family, you want to pay very close attention to your mental health and to the mental health of the members in your family, right? So one of the things that you want to watch for is someone who might be threatening to commit suicide. Sometimes people will vocalize the fact that they don't want to be here anymore, or if a person is actually saying that they feel hopeless, or if they feel trapped, or if they feel alone, you want to be mindful of that. Or if somebody say, hey, I don't know if I even want to be here anymore. I know a lot of times, you know, when a person commits suicide, oftentimes they make multiple threats to the point to where people don't take them as seriously anymore. So you want to be mindful of that and make sure that that person's not going out and buying a gun or purchasing a gun. Make sure that you keep knives and stuff like that. A recent client of mine, one of their family members slept. They went on vacation, slept the whole time. And next thing you know, they just heard a gunshot go off in the middle of the night. Literally did not come out of the room. So you want to make sure that that person's not sleeping too much, or that they're not engaging in reckless behavior or giving away their belongings. You also want to make sure when it comes to reckless behavior that they're not drinking excessively or doing a lot of drugs and alcohol. And so those are some of the things that you definitely want to make sure that you watch for when somebody threatens to commit suicide or make statements like they don't want to be here anymore. Take the threats seriously, because if nothing else, even if they've said it multiple times, at least offer them to go and see somebody and offer to go with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's good feedback, LaShonda. We definitely appreciate it. You guys give us some likes for that story on behalf of my mom, and then, you know, that information that LaShonda was able to give us as well. We're going to move on to Tamika. Tamika, the question for you is, how can family members intervene in a scenario like this?
Yeah. And, you know, I think that's a really good question. And it really speaks to what LaShonda was talking about. It's the awareness, like being aware of how your family member is interacting and knowing if they're starting to show up a little differently, and not just knowing it, but going to them and saying something about it in an empathetic and loving and a non-judgmental way. Because if you encounter a family member in a way of like, what's wrong with you? They're not going to be receptive or open to engaging in a dialogue in a way that makes them feel safe. So it's about evoking safety and then talking, to family members about, what can I do to support you? That question is such a simple question, but we don't always ask that question. And those words have so much power. What can I do to support you? If it's a family member that has weapons in their home, talk to them about I want to make sure that you're okay. I want you to talk to me and I love you. Can we have a safety plan together? Are you interested in talking to someone? How can I support you with that? If there is a lack of resources, offering resources in monetary sense. If they have weapons, ask if you can hold their weapons for them until they feel safe again. Shifting their environment and giving them space where they can feel safe, they can have open dialogue and communication, and really, again, being aware. Because oftentimes when people are depressed or they're at a point in a place of suicidality, they're feeling alone. They're feeling extremely alone. And sometimes it's a matter of reminding someone that they are not alone and offering them that level of support. But again, really talking about safety planning, offering support, storing or removing weapons from their home, and being attuned with your loved ones. Because oftentimes, we all go through things and we show up differently, but recognizing you've been different for a little while. So how are you? How can I support you? It's a matter of, being empathetic and showing up in ways that allow you to know that you're not by yourself. And really, if it's a matter of alcohol or drug use, watching that alcohol or drug use, encouraging them to get support and treatment, not from a perspective of I'm judging you, but from a perspective of I care about you and I care about your well-being. So it's really, again, just really being attuned to your loved ones and having open conversations from an empathetic, non-judgmental perspective.
Very nice. Very nice. Affiliated to withstand all ridicule. The support system is so important, what it sounds like. So going back to you, Mom. So obviously you've dealt with this. How do you think that the experience that you had with Grandma, how that actually affected, me and Adam, family that was left behind? Can you speak to that?
I think myself and all of the siblings, we should have had counseling. And like I said, it wasn't offered. And in our day too, I heard you guys talking the other night, kind of like the preview show, why Blacks stray away from it, because crazy nowadays is a good thing. People thrive on, I'm crazy or she's crazy. That's a good thing. Back then it wasn't. We were very prideful, and that's the first thing that people did was stereotype you and judge you. And suicide back then amongst African Americans just was not, it was unheard of, and if it did happen, it was very hush hush. We didn't talk about that. That was swept under the rug. Even family members were left to lie and were, they wouldn't own up to what had happened. I had always been that one. Yes. Our mother took her life. And with that being said, my mother was a very, very strong woman. My mother did what you called back then day work. She did janitorial service in offices, and she cleaned houses for the community around here. And she worked for a well-known family in this city. And after all those years of working and dedication, she found out, she's 8 years from retirement, that they had not been paying in any taxes for her. So when it was time for her to retire, that set her into a very deep, deep depression, that she wasn't going to have anything there. And at that time too, that October, prior to that October before this took place, my mother fell and broke her hip. She took ill. Well, here we are again, having health insurance and having these hospitals come upon, not having any, time off, paid time off, like the things we have now. So that set her into a very, very deep depression. Years later, we did find out too that my mother had discovered that she had colon cancer. Back then, those things weren't spoke of. Cancer, we were not advanced as we were now. So it was like you mentioned the big C word, people saw the big D word, death. You know, you got cancer, you were going to die. And so she sunk into a depression and, you know, just couldn't come out of it. And that was the results of it. But as far as siblings, it affected us all in different ways. My brothers, they were older. I know we all had our battles. We all had our battles, and just the grace of God, the only thing that I can hold accountable for us all still being here is the grace of God. As far as raising you and Adam Raymond, I kept that from you all for a very long time, for the fear of you all thinking, not being ashamed, but, well, what if mom gets depressed? What if she gets sick? You know, that's the one time that I did choose to lie to my children when they asked what happened to my, you know, to their grandma. Well, she died. You know, she had high blood pressure and she got sick and she died, because I didn't want them living in the fear of thinking that, well, will you someday do this? So that's what I say. I give it, you know, I can't say it enough. I give it all to God, because that too was supplying those answers. And I know, and I'm not saying anything against, I wish I had went and had therapy. I could have had a different outlook. I wouldn't have had to carry the burden as long as I did.
And kudos again to my mom. I mean, you know, having 2 kids at 19 years old, no parents, to do what she did, you know, it's phenomenal. I can't speak, you know, enough about her. So love you, Mom.
And I love you.
So before we get into this next segment, I think it was a very interesting start. Don't you guys agree?
Yeah, it was really
But before
good.
we get to this next segment, Monica, you want to give some kudos out to the viewers? I see we got Miss
Yes,
Reno.
we have quite a few people that are on here. We have my Aunt Faye from Indianapolis is on here. Pam Davis. Hey, Pam. Karina Garcia. She
Hello,
said she'll be
Karina.
ordering some apparel from At
Good
War
deal.
Apparel. Drake is on here, and he
What up,
actually
Brad?
tagged one of his uncles and said, check this out. Brittany Johnson said a lot of you are her faves, so she's excited to hear and learn from you all. Dr. Kenneth Sullivan from Indianapolis is on here. He was actually on here last week as well. Aletha Fields, Professor Fields is on here. She said, hey, Cynthia. Pastor Taylor is on here. Tango Jones. Actually, Pastor Taylor had a question. I'm going to pose a question a little bit later. But his question was, what do you do when you're being empathetic and you speak from care, but others see it as passing judgment? So once we have our open forum where we're asking questions from the audience, we're going to pose that question again. We're going to go ahead and get right into our next segment because we're already running out of time. So the next segment is all about the broken family. The United States of America was built on systemic oppression. And a part of that systemic oppression was the breaking down of the slave family, eventually ended up being the Black family, and it's systemic. It's happened. There's been different reasons and different methods or mechanisms that kept the family broken. And the purpose of that is if we're a strengthened catalyst as far as a family is concerned, then we can break some of those cycles that have also been in place to keep us from being impoverished, to keep us from having the level of lack that some of us experience now. So the broken family, it's not just single parent homes, it's the incarceration of a parent or guardian. It is divorce. It is a single parent home. It is the removal of somebody from the family that has been in the family. It could be a sibling. It could be a child that's living with a grandparent or an aunt or uncle. The broken family is a huge infrastructure within the Black community across the board. So I wanted to pose a question to my Lantha, but I think that she was having some issues with technology. So I'm going to pose the question to Tia. What mental health issues arise as a result of broken families due to divorce, single parent homes, incarcerated family members, etc.? So what are some mental health issues that arise as a result of being a part of a broken family?
Well, there are a myriad of issues, and I'm just going to try to keep it as simple as possible because a lot of these changes are very traumatic. You know, so we're dealing with a lot of trauma here. Issues regarding abandonment, lots of depression, anxiety, insecurity, and instability. And really what happens is that many times families are like in this constant state of survival. There's this constant survival mode that families are in. And, you know, this is what I noticed even in therapy, depending on who we're talking about, is that we're talking about teaching coping skills and self-management skills. You know, when, you know, there's a teenager or a child who's like, look, you know, I don't have no food. I don't have any food. My brother was just shot. Yo, my mom, I haven't seen my mom. So it's a lot of trauma, I think, that we're dealing with, that is very generational, and cyclical, and there's no real safe place to heal or to recover. I think that one of the things that we have valued is, and I think it's a strength that we are so resilient, but I think that we tend to value all these things that we go through without really being able to acknowledge, we kind of need a place where we can heal and settle a bit, because a surviving brain thinks very different than a thriving one, because that child or that parent is still got to go to school or got to think. And if I'm thinking about how to survive here, I'm not really thinking about learning. I'm not really thinking about my future. I'm not really thinking about those things that can set me up for success. And I just know as clinicians, it's important to acknowledge those basic needs of just safety, food first, in order for us to move forward. So there are lots of mental health issues that just really arrive from different types of trauma, incarceration of parents. I mean, all of this. So we're dealing with a lot here. And I'm glad that we're doing this segment, because it's important that people know that the help is here and that they are seen. It's just about access to, like Miss Ellen said, it's about access. As well. So I know I kind of rambled on with that one, but you know, that's my
I love what you said about surviving versus thriving, because I'm an educator. I say this almost every week, and I see all the time, I see students who are just trying to make it. Some students just go to school because that's their only safe place.
Yes.
So how can they thrive in their community? How can they thrive at home? How can they thrive at school when they're just trying to get their next meal, literally? And what broke my heart today, I was looking at the fact that JCPS ran out of, okay, so those of you that are watching outside of Louisville, Kentucky, the public school system in Louisville is Jefferson County Public Schools. And they ran out of food today, which is awful, because we have students who will probably go the next couple of weeks with little to no food. And people were so outraged at the fact that JCPS ran out of food, instead of being outraged at the fact that so many people needed the food. They needed that to survive. So how in the world are we going to expect our students who normally get, and I know we're not just talking about kids, but that's my passion. They normally get at least 2 meals a day, Monday through Friday. Right. And now they're in NTI, they're home, they have those broken families, they have that trauma that they're dealing with, they don't have food, and now some of them could potentially go the next 2 weeks without anything to eat. So that all goes back to, I'm sorry, and we might have to do a whole show about systemic oppression. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but
that's all up my alley.
That is a good deal. I love what you said about surviving versus thriving. We need to thrive as a community, and the only way some of us are going to be able to thrive is if we get some help, because there's so much trauma that we're dealing with, whether it's because of a broken family or some other issues that we've had. So Mylantha, when thinking about broken families, how can therapy help that? How can therapy help children, adults, anybody that's connected to a broken family? How can therapy help us to thrive despite needing to survive? I love that, honey.
Well, it's giving everybody the tools to learn how to thrive rather than survive. And it really comes down to, when I'm working with kids and their families and trying to provide resources for students, it usually ends up with, like, there's a behavior problem, and figuring out what the behavior problem is and why that's happening. And more likely than not, it's not what the teachers think. It's usually something else that's happening at home or in life or whatever. And so just at first, it's educating the parents on, like, what their kids need, and the fact that even though you survive some of these things and you're out here surviving, your kids may not be able to do the same thing. So it's giving them the tools and teaching them, like, what is needed and what their kids can use and how it could be helpful in school. And then sometimes it's even teaching parents that, like, this is something that you can use. Like, we're talking about your child losing somebody that's close to them, like their grandma, but you just lost your mom. So how are you doing? And what are the tools you need? And then even having parents disclose and talk about, this happened to me and I got through it. But realizing like, I'm not telling them, did you really get through it? Because that's the initial meeting, but really thinking through like, how are we getting through it? Are we like, is it still there? Like you're crying in my office right now. So did you really get through that? And so do you need some of the resources? And talking to them about like advocating for themselves when it comes to those resources, making sure it's like, going to somebody that you feel comfortable with, like not just getting stuck with one agency just because that's what you know, but there's a lot of different agencies and a lot of different people and people who look like you and people who can help you through this and understand some of the stuff that you have been through, whether it's in your household or in society. So just helping them understand these things. It's basically educating them what therapy is. It's not what it has been perceived through the years and who it was made for. It wasn't made for us originally. So just helping them understand that and that there's a lot of tools out there for not only their kids, but for them.
You're muted, Monica. It was just a rambling way.
That happened during the last show, wasn't it? I started off and I was just talking up a storm. You're like, Monica, you're muted. There was a little bit of a feedback, so I muted my mic just to ensure that it wasn't me that was doing that. But I'm glad that you mentioned the fact, because I was talking about kids and students, but I'm glad that you mentioned the adults that go through trauma because of being a part of a broken family. Because when I went through my divorce, I thought I was losing my mind. It was a good decision, the best decision for me and my children. It was. But I thought something's not right here. Like I didn't realize that I was going through the stages of grief. I knew that I was doing the right thing, but I also knew that I was upset. But how could I be upset if I know I'm doing the right thing? And then I'm crying. Now I'm happy. And then I'm sad. And I said, oh, something's not right here. And I called my therapist because I do believe in therapy. And I needed to check and I just need to make sure I was okay, honey. Am I losing my mind? Like I can't sleep this night. Now I'm sleeping for a couple of days. Like what is happening here? I don't know what's going on. And she explained to me that I was going through the stages of grief. And I've had a couple of friends since then that have gone through a divorce. One of my good friends is going through one now. And because there's such a stigma behind therapy, it's like I'm their makeshift therapist. And so anytime they're going through something they think is a little bit off, they call me like, Monica, is this normal? And so I'm glad that I was actually able to get therapy during my process and encourage them to get therapy. But at the same time, with the same token, like Ms. Ellen said, not everybody has access to insurance to be able to garner those resources. So adults need therapy whenever the family infrastructure is broken. There's grief, there's whatever is happening, and kids need it as well. It's very, very, very important. All right. So we're going to skip because we only have about 20 minutes left, and I do want us to get to the next segment. So poverty and trauma, we're going to talk about that real quick, and then we're going to talk about the nitty gritty. A lot of us were raised in the church, or we know about God, and we have a pastor on our panel. And so we're going to have a conversation about religion versus therapy. And so, Ray, are you going to go ahead and start with the poverty and trauma segment?
Absolutely. So it's not a secret that environmental effects lead to, mental health issues, things that go on in the household, as mentioned, generational effects, us normalizing behavior can add to these mental health issues. So we'll start with Tamika. Tamika, can you describe mental health crisis that the Black community faces as it relates to generational poverty and trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about generational anything, we are considering that we are carrying in, regardless if we know it or not, we're carrying in past pains, we're carrying in past woes and losses of people before us. So we don't always even know that. And so it is a matter of, recognizing, who you are and where you're from. But when we're talking about just the trauma and the poverty and the crises that come, I think oftentimes we don't fully consider losses and those losses that we happen to have in our lives, because we have losses of expectations, relationships. We have losses of so many things beyond deaths that can feel like deaths for us. And so oftentimes when, you are having a family moves and a kid had, strong ties to one community, to the school, to the teachers, and then they go from one place to the next, that's a crisis for that child. And that can turn up in behavioral issues in the school setting, which is then mislabeled. And there's an assumption that there's a behavioral issue when actually this child is depressed. And so oftentimes, the mental health crises in the Black community are mislabeled realistically. And it comes from, losses. Oftentimes we have great expectations of ourselves, and we have great expectations of our children, and we have great expectations of all these people. And when that expectation isn't met, because let's be honest, I have been taught, I'll say that, I can't say everybody, but I've been taught, like, you have to do the best because you've got to work a little harder to get what it is that somebody else has that's not Black. So you're striving so hard to get something at somebody else's level. And if you don't meet it, if you miss it, that's a crisis in and of itself. The fact that we have that scarcity mindset, because it's really what it is. We are having to come from behind. We have had generational, again, trauma of our families being broken, of having, educational difficulties, in the sense that we are looked at, a child who may be non-Black, looked at as anxious. This child looks like he's oppositionally defiant. The fact that we have to, those are crises. And I think oftentimes we're always looking for a bigger picture of like what a mental health crisis is. But a mental health crisis could be a baseline of just a loss of expectation, loss of a loved one, loss from a move, loss from a job transition, loss from a lack of a promotion. Again, systemic racism in and of itself. And it's really important that we, again, know where we come from, what those expectations are, because you need to negotiate your own expectations and others' expectations of you, and really be aware of who you are and what you're trying to gain so that you can mitigate those crises. And I know I'm starting to answer another question, so I'm going to shut this down. But again, those mental health crises, it all typically stems from some type of loss of income, loss of housing, loss of all these things, or the fear of, because the fear in and of itself is traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good feedback. Thank you so much, Tamika. We're going to go to Cynthia on this question. So, Cynthia, what are some long-term effects of poverty and trauma in the Black community?
She's muted.
There you go.
First and foremost, there you go. First and foremost, I believe that it's imperative that we look at the fact that there's a history of trauma. That history of trauma goes past our mother, past our fathers, past our grandparents, right? Historically, we have some of that trauma that we take along with us, and it helps to create a foundation that is somewhat off-kiltered. So when you have that foundation that is off-kilter, then you have to completely rebuild that foundation of what normalcy is, right? So within the Black community, when we don't have the resources, what happens is that we also have a decline in the quality of services, right? So oftentimes they'll have students that do X, Y, and Z, whereas the actual case might be something where we need someone who is more skilled, who has a better skill set in that position. And just as everyone else has already said, perpetuating that generational trauma equates to some form of a norm. You can even see it if you look along long periods of time in our music as Black folk. You can actually see where some of our mental issues, some of our broken family kind of plays into the music and what's acceptable, if that makes sense, as a norm. So
no, that's good.
That's
we mentioned it in the preview yesterday. I think one of my comments was, in terms of just being a Black man in general, one of the things that really affect us, and it comes from generational nurturing, and how we're raised, but it's a pride factor. A lot of Black men, we feel like, we're we lose a little bit of power. We weaken by the fact that we have to go speak with someone to, sort out some of the issues that we're dealing with. We're raised to be so strong because, we do have to face a lot of adversity, in society, just being a Black man. So we're raised so strong to, think that we can deal with a lot of our issues just by ourselves. You're a man, you should be able to deal with that by yourself. As I mentioned yesterday, even with my father as an example, I never seen my dad cry. I never seen him show emotions, I think with the exception of one time, and that was at my grandmother's funeral. But outside of that, I never seen emotions. So a lot of times we are nurtured, we're raised to, think that we don't need help, that we should be able to, take care of a lot of this stuff ourselves. So no, it's interesting that you said that. We're going to go, the next question is for you, Tia. So do you think that some members of the Black community shy away from therapy connected to poverty and trauma because it's been normalized?
Because poverty and trauma have been normalized? Is that the question? I would say my quick answer is yes, and there are other reasons why they would shy away from that. One is pretty much what we may think that therapy is all about. The other one is I don't even know if it's about shying away. There was something about Miss Ellen's story when she was talking about she was a young mother. She had gone through all this stuff, and she was and what they did was that they gave medication to her instead of recommending that she go to therapy. So I would say that not only Black people might normalize it, I think the system normalizes it. And so the system will normalize it. And so they'll do what they can to band-aid it instead of like redirecting towards a system that could actually help long term and not just band-aid it and then depend on Miss Ellen's resilience as a young mother and a young Black woman in order to get through that. So sure, part of it is normalized by the Black community. Part of it is normalized by the system. There are myths about who therapy is for and what it's about. I love there's a movement to decolonize therapy, to decolonize what it looks like, what it feels like. I love the work that you're doing, Miss Cynthia. Using music, using dance, using all these different things that incorporate the strengths of who we are as a people. So it's about creating a whole different narrative about what therapy is about, in addition to just having access to it. I'm one of the only therapists my Black friends know. That's it. So they're calling me, and I'm thinking there's a list, but nobody knows because it's not normal. So I think we also have to increase access to who we are and to just kind of broaden out with respect to what therapy looks like so that we can fit it and tailor it to our needs as well and our culture.
It's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because that's another topic that we covered yesterday as well in the preview. It's very good. I'm glad you commented on that. So
real quick, I have the offering basket because she was preaching, and so I had to get my offering basket.
I'm passionate about this stuff. I mean,
we love it.
This is not just something that we do. These are people's lives. Period.
Yeah. Exactly.
Period. This is a serious deal. So I'm gonna be quiet now. Let me mute myself.
No, it was good. It was good because I was even saying that, when you decide to even speak to somebody, obviously you're speaking about some things that are uncomfortable. So it's best that you align with somebody that you feel comfortable with. I mentioned yesterday, I would want to speak with somebody who was, older gentleman, older Black man who, has maybe walked in the similar shoes, in a path that I've walked. So you got to make sure that you align with someone that you're comfortable with. So very good feedback here. So Mylantha, to finish off this particular segment, how can therapy help overcome these generational curses?
Therapy is going to help explain what has happened and what you can do about it. And I feel like too often folks just kind of put it away, just box it up, put it away. Like we all have, we just put it away. We don't deal with it. And then we start seeing it come out in like illnesses in our body and relationships and how we deal with life, period. So it really does help us explain why we do things, what we need to do differently, gives us the tools to work on those things, how we interact with our communities and just different relationships out there. So explaining some of that to folks so that they understand that it's not just sitting there talking and like basically being a white person laying on a white person's couch and what you see on TV all the time. It's really getting deep into all the stuff that you have experienced with somebody who can help you get that out, and with someone who can help you work through it and talk through it. And that's like the reteaching of it when working with kids and families, and working with families in poverty too, because therapy hasn't been for families in poverty. It's always for somebody who has money. So with a little more access, especially for kids, explaining to people what it is and what you need it for and how it's going to help, and really making sure that it's not a way for someone just to come into their life and get them into the system. Because that's what a lot of families worry about also, is like, we're going to tell our business and then all of a sudden people are going to come in and like disrupt our family. So just having those conversations and being that person to help them like kind of hold their hand through it. At school, I don't tell people that they have to come see me. I give myself on top of many other people, males, Black, white, like I make sure people feel comfortable so that they can have those conversations with somebody, because you're not going to want to put all that out there, and you don't have time to be, making sure you explain to somebody like the problems you have in your neighborhood, or what racism looks like, or how some of these affect you. So just making sure parents and families are able to advocate for themselves, on top of knowing what therapy is and how it can be useful to them.
So just real quick, when I was at Atkinson, my Lantha was my personal therapist. She was my school-based therapist. She didn't know this, but every time she was in a room by herself, I would look around. I'm like, hey, how are you, honey? Hey, you're fine? Okay, this is what's going on with me. She was the mental health practitioner for the building. And so I don't know if you realize that you're my therapist. You probably did. You probably did a little bit, a couple times. But I really do appreciate you. You're so good at what you do. All right.
And so I grew up amazing, so whatever I could hear was okay with me.
Monica, you was taking advantage of a free resource, huh?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I mean, not everybody knows my story, but I just found my father last year. And so my Lantha was one of the first people that I talked to about that, because she was our in-school therapist. And so everything is fine with my father now. We have a wonderful relationship, just to throw that out there, my Lantha. So if you're wondering, everything is good in the hood. It wasn't at first, though. Remember, it wasn't at first. But I went through therapy with my Lantha, and I'm okay.
Progress.
So anyway, LaShonda, Pastor Fletcher, we're going to go into our final segment. And there is a stigma in the Black community in general about mental health support, but in the Black church, we pray. If you just pray, it'll be okay. If you fast, it's going to be all right. If you come to church, you go to Bible study, you go to Sunday school, do all these things, and God's going to fix it. God's going to do it. And yes, he can. He can do all things but fail. Don't get me wrong, honey, because I used to be a preacher myself. But what is that? Like, why is it that we will go to church and I've heard some wonderful counseling from pastors, bishops, whatever, but then there are some professionals that can dig in a little bit deeper. So what is that? What, and how do we get beyond that so we can actually get the help that we need, and we're not suffering in silence because we're ashamed that the church people might know that we're actually suffering in silence?
Yeah. And so I think a big part of it, and one of the things that I recognize about the church and that I also had put in my book is that since slavery, the church has been a place of refuge for African Americans. Our pastors are oftentimes, they wear multiple hats. We use them as a counselor, a banker, they just have all of these different hats. And usually if our pastors, and I know this for a fact as a therapist and a pastor, if a pastor tells a person, hey, go see her, they call me, right? And the pastor usually say, hey, I got my member such and such, and she's going to call you, because there's a certain level of trust that we have when it comes to our pastors and when it comes to the church. But of course, we also have to realize, you know, with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, there's a big mistrust when it comes to the medical system, when it comes to African Americans. And so I do know when it comes to, you know, the way that I usually counsel individuals and counsel couples, a lot of times I usually have to educate them first, right? And I still think that it goes back to educating pastors as well, because there's certain issues that pastors simply should not mess with, right? If I'm coming to a pastor and I have bipolar disorder, if I have schizophrenia, then guess what? Pastor need to be referring me, you know what I'm saying, to a psychiatrist and to a therapist. And so the issue with that, even when it comes to couples counseling, you know, because even couples seek out pastors for couples counseling. Well, if one of these individuals have a mental health issue, you understand what I'm saying?
Come on.
Bipolar disorder, then it's going to be very difficult for that pastor to make any kind of progress in that relationship, if not bring further harm.
Right, right. And I've sat in many of counseling sessions, and this is the thing. I know a lot of times when you're dealing with marriage in the church, a lot of times the pastor and wife, they look like goals, like relationship goals, right? And so we listen to what they have to say, because if my husband would just do what pastor's doing, everything's gonna be all right. Or if my wife would just do what first lady's doing, or what lady whatever's doing, then everything will be all right. But don't nobody know what's going on at the pastor's home, okay?
Exactly.
I'm a living witness that what was going on at the pastor's home, y'all don't want none of that, okay? So it sounds good when you're at the church and you're getting counseling from the one that you're entrusting your soul with. But at the same time, there are people that are educated, that have experience to really dig deep into what the root of the cause of the issue is, and can heal you that way. There's healing that can take place at church, and there's healing that can take place in a therapist's office, on the couch, really pouring out your soul and your heart of you know, about what's going on in your life, and actually getting advice, practical advice that can help you tomorrow and the next day. And if you need more than practical advice, honey, they can get you a pill. Okay, get your little Zoloft, get your little Prozac, get your little pill, whatever you need to regulate. Because sometimes it's not even related to experience per se. It could be a chemical imbalance. And if I am preaching the word and I can't really identify or do a blood, do blood work to see if it's a chemical imbalance, then I can tell you and pray for you and help you and hope that you can come to altar a little while longer. But I can't prescribe you no medication. So sometimes we need to go beyond that pastor's office, and we need to get on somebody's couch, and not no random. Somebody like a social worker, a therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, to help us through these issues, because they're actually experienced to do that. So real quick, why don't we get therapy? One thing was because of a lack of trust. That's what I heard someone say before, lack of trust in the medical field, lack of resources and access. And I do want you to know, most schools across the nation, they actually have mental health practitioners that are in their buildings now. And so if you don't have access because of insurance, your child can get support at the school. As being a part of a school, I know one thing that parents shy away from is the fact that if they tell their business to somebody at school, CPS will be involved. We are mandated reporters. We are, but your child may still need some help. So try to be open-minded with that, and make sure that your child is in a safe place where that doesn't happen. But there are resources, even if you don't have insurance, that can help you with that. What are some other things that we said that could prevent us from getting therapy? Are those the main things?
I will say too that oftentimes African Americans do have a strong support system, right? And so since we do have such a strong support system, we can call granny, we can call mama, we can call our sister, we can call our best friends. A lot of times we choose those people because we feel more comfortable with them, but a lot of times we need professional help.
Absolutely. All right, we only have 1 minute left, and I appreciate you all. Actually, our minute's gone. But if you have a private practice, if you could please share your information so we can get you all some clients. We can build. I know, Cynthia, I know you have your other practice coming up, so you need to fill that one up. Okay. So share your information about your private practice, Cynthia. You're muted again, honey.
Let me say I'm technologically challenged, okay? But in any event, I have a private practice that's in the Highlands. And if anyone is interested in therapy, they can feel free to just Google my name, Cynthia D. Fletcher. And we will set them up in the new practice that's coming January 1.
All right,
Embrace
thank
Counseling.
you. Tia, do you have a private?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm in private practice, but I'm starting a new private practice. I'm starting in January. It's called Attuned Counseling and Consulting. You can just Google me. I'm on Psychology Today at Tia Williams Hampton, LCSW, and you can find me and email me there, and we can connect that way.
Alrighty, Tamika.
I also am in private practice. My private practice is Level Counseling LLC. My website is levelcounselingllc.com. So absolutely seek out counseling and support for yourself, and know that you're not alone, that it is safe, and it is okay for you to be better than you are right now.
And Pastor Fletcher.
So you can reach out to me at www.rcclouisville.com. I'm also on Psychology Today. If you Google my name, then you'll also find me there. Or if you shoot me an inbox on Facebook or Instagram, then I will also reply to that as well.
All righty.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mylantha, for being on here. Thank you, Miss Ellen, for your story and starting us off right. And Ray, it's always wonderful to host with you. You're awesome. Like your mom said, you're a wonderful young man.
Well, I appreciate that. And likewise, Miss Monica, owe a lot of kudos to you for getting this together, getting these lovely queens together to be able to share this informative information that can definitely help someone that's in need. Again, guys, continue to support us in our mental health initiative. We do have a fundraiser going on as well. Any of you ladies, when you start in your practice, if you do need some assistance with finding some professional people, definitely get in contact with me. I do have a recruiting company as well. I have some open positions as it relates to clinical social work as well. So kudos to everybody. This was an excellent show. I love it. Our queens are just doing a phenomenal job. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. With that, we're signing off. Bye.